Success. Wealth. Power. Damarion Westbrook had it all, or at least, that's what he wanted the world to believe. A multimillionaire real estate mogul, a devoted husband, a loving father. To his thousands of followers, he was the blueprint for black excellence, the man who had cracked the code to financial freedom. And standing beside him was his wife, Xavier, graceful, loyal, the perfect partner in both love and business. Together, they were unstoppable. The Westbrooks weren't just living the American dream. They were the dream. But dreams have a way of turning into nightmares. Because behind the lavish lifestyle, behind the designer suits, the luxury cars, the million-dollar mansions, there was something else. Something darker. A secret so carefully hidden that when it finally unraveled, it didn't just destroy their empire. It shattered their family in the most horrifying way imaginable. How does a man who built his fortune from nothing throw it all away in a single night? What pushes someone to commit the unthinkable? Was it desperation? Betrayal? Or had this ending been written long before the world ever knew his name? This is the shocking story of Damarion and Xavier Westbrook, the rise, the lies, and the moment when it all came crashing down in bloodshed. Before we dive into this shocking case, like this video and subscribe for more chilling tales of love, lies, and betrayal. Damarion Westbrook was the man every aspiring entrepreneur wanted to be. At 39 years old, he had built a $40 million real estate empire from the ground up, or at least, that's what the world believed. A self-made millionaire and a real estate mogul, a visionary, and the face of black excellence, he used his rags to riches story to inspire thousands. His name was synonymous with wealth, success, and the promise that with the right mindset, anyone could achieve financial freedom. Online, he was more than just a businessman, he was a movement. His motivational videos racked up millions of views, and his followers hung on to his every word, desperate to unlock the same success. But as we've seen time and time again, when something looks too perfect, there's usually a dark secret hiding beneath the surface. Standing right beside him was his wife, Xavier Westbrook. At 37, she was the picture of elegance, graceful, polished, the definition of a woman who had it all. But before the designer handbags and first-class vacations, Xavier was just a girl with big dreams and an unshakable belief in the man she loved. She and Damarion met in college, he was at Morehouse, she was at Spelman. Back then, they weren't millionaires. They weren't household names. They were just two young lovers struggling to make ends meet, hustling their way through school, sharing takeout in a cramped apartment, dreaming of a future bigger than their circumstances. And when the money finally started rolling in, Xavier never let the world forget that she had been there from the very beginning. She wasn't just a wife, she was his ride or die, the woman who stuck by him when they had nothing. And now, she was living the life they had always dreamed of. To the outside world, the Westbrooks were untouchable. Their mansion in Buckhead, worth a staggering $5 million, was a symbol of their success. Their fleet of luxury cars, the designer wardrobes, the extravagant vacations to Dubai and the Maldives, it was all proof that hard work and faith could turn dreams into reality. Their 14-year-old daughter, Jalea, had never known struggle. She was growing up in a world of privilege, where the biggest concern was which private school to attend or what exotic destination they'd visit next. On social media, they were the ultimate power couple, the embodiment of black wealth, love, and success. Behind the glamorous photos and motivational speeches, behind the perfectly curated image of success, the Westbrooks were hiding something. A secret so dark, it would destroy everything in one brutal, bloody night. Before the designer suits and million-dollar deals, the lavish vacations and luxury cars, before they gave birth to their daughter 14 years ago, Damarion and his wife, Xavier, were barely surviving. The struggle was real, overdue rent notices, maxed-out credit cards, and nights filled with arguments over money. Xavier had once been a dreamer, a woman who believed in their love, who stood by Damarion through every setback. But love didn't pay the bills. As the years passed and their situation remained the same, her patience wore thin. She had sacrificed, struggled, waited for the promise of a better life. And now, she was tired. Tired of counting pennies, tired of seeing other women living the life she wanted, tired of feeling like she had bet on the wrong man. She wanted more, deserved more. Damarion knew it. He saw the disappointment in her eyes, the resentment that was slowly replacing the love they once shared. They had met in college, Spelman and Morehouse, two young dreamers ready to take on the world. She had been his biggest supporter, his ride or die. But now, she was questioning him, pressuring him. When are we going to have the life we planned? When are you going to be the man you promised to be? Damarion couldn't fail her. The fear of losing her, of not being the provider she demanded, pushed him to the edge. Desperation became his motivation. That's when he took a massive risk, one that would change their lives forever. He secured a massive loan through deception, falsifying documents, manipulating numbers, doing whatever it took to make it look legitimate. It wasn't just about getting money. It was about survival. It was about proving himself. And it worked. Almost overnight, their world transformed. They moved into an upscale apartment, traded in their beat-up car for a brand new Range Rover, and dined at restaurants they had only seen in magazines. Xavier's resentment melted away, replaced by admiration. She looked at him the way she used to. And for Damarion, that was everything. But he wasn't done. This wasn't just about being comfortable, he wanted to be rich. Really rich. He studied the game, learned how the wealthy moved, and became a master at manipulating the system. He created shell companies, took out more high-interest loans, and used that money to fund an even more extravagant lifestyle. The illusion was so well-crafted that even he started believing it. Damarion Westbrook became a name. His empire grew, his net worth skyrocketed into the tens of millions. Soon, he had it all, a $5 million mansion in Atlanta's exclusive Buckhead neighborhood, a fleet of luxury cars, power and influence, and then there was Jalea. She was an innocent bystander in all of this, a straight-A student with dreams of becoming a neurosurgeon. She had never known struggle, only luxury. From the outside looking in, she was the daughter of a power couple, living a life most could only dream of. But the foundation of their success wasn't built on hard work. It was built on lies. Damarion didn't just have wealth, he sold wealth. His courses, his mentorship programs, his motivational speeches all promised people the same financial freedom he had. Thousands paid for his secrets, desperate to follow in his footsteps. They believed in him, just like he once believed in himself. But every empire built on deception eventually crumbles. By early 2025, the cracks in Damarion's world became too big to ignore. Creditors were calling, demanding payments he couldn't make. The money was running out, and there were no more tricks left to play. The IRS had launched an investigation into his financial dealings, and the numbers weren't adding up. Then came the final blow: their mansion, the ultimate symbol of their success, was officially foreclosed. The dream was over. But for Damarion Westbrook, the nightmare was just beginning. The notice had arrived that morning, 72 hours. That was all they had left. 3 days to pack up their lives and walk away from the illusion they had spent years perfecting. The mansion, the cars, the prestige, it had all been a facade, and now, the world was about to see the truth. Xavier sat on the edge of their California king bed, her hands shaking as she read the eviction notice again. The weight of humiliation crushed her chest. This wasn't just about losing a house. It was about losing everything: their reputation, their name, their place in the world. She glanced over at Damarion, who was pacing the bedroom like a caged animal. His once polished presence was unraveling. The expensive suit he had put on that morning was now wrinkled, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. He had spent years building this empire, and now, it was all slipping through his fingers like sand. "I won't go through this, Damarion." Xavier's voice was flat, emotionless. She had cried enough. The anger, the fear, the shame, it had all drained her. Now, there was only exhaustion. I can't go down with you. Damarion froze mid-step, his back to her. For a moment, the room was deathly silent. When he finally turned around, his eyes were dark, unreadable. What did you just say? I'm taking Jalea and leaving. Xavier met his gaze without hesitation. I don't care where we go. I just can't be here when it happens. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. You're leaving. The words dripped with disbelief. After everything I've done for you? Xavier let out a bitter laugh. Done for me? She stood up, finally meeting him at eye level. You mean everything you did for yourself? The lies. The fraud. The debt. Don't act like you did this for us, Damarion. You did it for you. And now it's over. The sharpness of her words sliced through him. His hands clenched into fists. The betrayal hit him harder than any lawsuit, harder than any financial loss. It wasn't the money that was breaking him, it was her. The woman he had built this life for. The woman who once stood by his side, who reveled in the luxury, who smiled at the expensive gifts and drank champagne at exclusive parties. She had encouraged him, indulged in every stolen dollar. And now? Now she wanted to run. The mansion was eerily silent, except for the occasional sound of Xavier zipping up her suitcase. The weight of finality hung in the air. She moved through their bedroom with precision, pulling clothes from hangers, shoving shoes into bags. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. She was done. Damarion stood near the doorway, watching in silence. His hands trembled, his breath shallow. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. She was supposed to stay. She was supposed to believe in him. They had made a pact back in college, loyalty above all else. Back then, they were just two kids with nothing but ambition and the hunger to be somebody. He had fought tooth and nail to give her the life she craved. The designer clothes, the luxury vacations, the mansion, the world had envied them. And now, she was throwing it all away. The eviction notice lay on the nightstand, mocking him. 72 hours. 3 days before the world knew the truth. The Westbrooks were nothing but frauds. The empire he built was crumbling, and the woman he had built it for was walking away. His jaw clenched as he watched her move, her every step an insult. She didn't even look at him. Didn't acknowledge the man who had made her a queen. Xavier, he said, his voice low, controlled. She didn't stop packing. What, Damarion? A storm raged in his chest. She sounded so indifferent. As if he were nothing but an inconvenience now. As if the years they had spent building this life together meant nothing. You don't get to walk away from this, he murmured, his fingers twitching at his side. Xavier let out a dry laugh. Watch me. That was it. That was the moment the last thread of control snapped. Without another thought, he reached into the nightstand drawer, his fingers closing around cold steel. The Glock 19 felt like an extension of himself, an answer to the chaos in his mind. His heart pounded, his vision tunneled. Before he could think, before he could reconsider, his finger squeezed the trigger. The first bullet struck her in the chest. Xavier gasped, stumbling back against the bed, eyes wide with shock. The second shot tore through her ribs, knocking the air from her lungs. The third ended it. She collapsed onto the California King bed, blood spreading across the crisp white sheets like ink spilling over paper. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The woman who once dripped in luxury, who once stood by his side as they ruled their world, now lay lifeless in their marital bed. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, Mommy. A scream. High-pitched. Terrified. Jalea. She stood in the doorway, her 14-year-old face twisted in horror, eyes locked onto the scene before her. She looked small, fragile. A child caught in a nightmare. Damarion turned slowly, gun still in hand. His daughter. His princess. The only one left in the world who still saw him as a hero. Tears streamed down her face. Her little hands trembled. "Daddy," her voice cracked, barely a whisper. "What did you do?" His grip on the gun tightened. He had built this life for her. For them. He couldn't let her see him like this. He couldn't let her grow up carrying this burden, knowing the truth. His heart twisted as he took a step forward. "I built this for us," he murmured, his voice hollow. Jaliyah shook her head, stumbling back. "Daddy, please," 2 gunshots rang out. She dropped to the floor. The spark of life in her brown eyes flickered, then disappeared. Silence. Damarion stood in the middle of the room, chest heaving, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. His wife, his daughter, gone. The mansion that once symbolized his success now felt like a tomb. 72 hours. It didn't matter anymore. There was nothing left to save, the mansion was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that seeped into the walls, pressing down like an unbearable weight. Damarion sat in the living room, the faint scent of blood lingering in the air. Upstairs, their bodies lay exactly where they had fallen. Xavier on the bed, her once flawless skin marred by bullet wounds, her lifeless eyes staring at the ceiling. Jaliyah on the floor, a child frozen in time, her blood pooling beneath her like a dark halo. He had stayed. For 24 hours, he had remained in the house with the dead, moving through the rooms as if nothing had changed. He passed by their bodies, stepped over bloodstains, inhaled the coppery scent that thickened the air, and yet, he felt nothing. No regret. No grief. Just an empty void where something human used to be. At some point, he had taken out his phone, scrolling through old videos. Happy moments. A vacation in Dubai, Xavier laughing as the wind tousled her hair. Jaliyah's 13th birthday, the room filled with pink and gold balloons. Christmas mornings in matching designer pajamas. Smiling. Loving. Perfect. He posted them on Instagram. Captioned them like nothing had happened. Family over everything. Loyalty is priceless, the comments flooded in almost immediately. Power couple goals. Best dad ever. Black excellence. They still believed the illusion. Even as his wife and daughter lay lifeless upstairs, people still saw him as the man he had so carefully crafted, a provider, a leader, a king. Damarion let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head as he leaned back into the couch. The world was blind. Stupid. He had spent his entire life manipulating perceptions, and even now, at his lowest, they still bought into the fantasy. He reached for the crystal decanter on the glass table in front of him. The deep amber liquid shimmered as he poured himself a glass of Louis XIII cognac, $1.500 a sip, the taste of power on his tongue. He swirled the glass in his hand, staring at the darkened TV screen in front of him. His reflection stared back. The man he had become. The man he had always been. There was no running from it now. When morning came, he was still there. The sound of footsteps echoed outside, muffled voices, the shuffling of paperwork, the jingle of keys. Then, the front door burst open. The eviction team had arrived. Damarion didn't move. Didn't flinch. It took them a moment to realize what they had walked into. The 2 men had expected resistance, maybe some pleading or threats. What they hadn't expected was the heavy scent of death thickening the air. One of them gagged at the first sight of blood. The other, braver, stepped forward hesitantly, his eyes scanning the scene. Then he saw her. Xavier's lifeless body, sprawled across the once pristine sheets, dried blood staining the silk. A choked gasp. A whispered, "Oh my God." Then Jaliyah. Her small frame collapsed on the floor, her expression frozen in fear, as if she had died still trying to comprehend what her father had done. Chaos erupted. Someone screamed. Someone ran outside. A phone was yanked out, frantic hands dialing 911. But Damarion didn't react. He sat in the living room, legs crossed, hands resting on his lap. The empty glass beside him, his phone still open on Instagram. He looked up at the men standing in the doorway, their faces pale with shock. And then, he smiled. He had been waiting for them. They came for him with handcuffs and cold eyes, treating him like any other criminal. Damarion Westbrook, once a man who commanded respect in boardrooms and luxury gala events, was now just another name on a list of men who had destroyed their own families. He didn't fight. As they led him out of the mansion, his face remained blank, expressionless. Outside, the press was already waiting, cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward, reporters shouting his name like he owed them something. Damarion, why did you do it? Was it planned? Do you have anything to say? He said nothing. At the precinct, they stripped him of his designer suit and handed him a standard orange jumpsuit. The room was sterile, cold, the walls too close together. He sat in the interrogation room, wrists shackled to the table, as detectives tried to crack him open. But Damarion was already broken. They betrayed me, he finally said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I gave them everything. The detectives exchanged glances, their disgust barely masked. They had seen murderers before, remorseful ones, furious ones, delusional ones. But Damarion? He was something else. A man who had built an empire, only to destroy his own kingdom the moment he lost control. By the time the trial began, the country was watching. The courtroom was packed, journalists, legal analysts, true crime fanatics all eager to witness the downfall of a man who had once been untouchable. Networks ran documentaries dissecting his rise and fall. Old interviews resurfaced, painting him as a devoted family man, a self-made entrepreneur, a black excellence icon. But now, his face was plastered across screens for a different reason. Murder. The prosecution didn't hold back. They laid it all out, the fraudulent deals, the house of lies, the money that had once been limitless but now meant nothing. The jury watched surveillance footage of Damarion being arrested, his face calm, unbothered, as if he had been pulled over for a traffic violation rather than the execution of his wife and daughter. He is a man consumed by his own ego, the prosecutor declared. A narcissist who valued power over love, money over family, and himself above all else. He could have walked away. He could have accepted the consequences of his fraud. But instead, he murdered the two people who trusted him the most. Damarion sat still, expressionless, as his own sins were laid bare. His defense team tried. They really did. They pushed the insanity plea, painting him as a man under immense pressure, a man who had snapped under the weight of failure. But the state had brought in their own psychologists, experts who dissected his mind with surgical precision. He knew what he was doing, one of them testified. He shot Xavier 3 times. He shot his daughter twice in the head. He didn't panic. He didn't call 911. He stayed in that house, drinking $1,000 cognac, posting old videos as if nothing had happened. That is not insanity. That is a man fully aware of his actions. And in the end, the jury saw what everyone else saw. A monster. It took them only 3 hours to decide his fate. Guilty. 2 counts of first-degree murder. When the verdict was read, Damarion showed no reaction. No outburst. No tears. Just silence. The judge looked at him for a long moment before speaking, his voice laced with quiet fury. You committed the ultimate act of selfishness and greed. Your wife and daughter did not deserve this. And for that, you will spend the rest of your life behind bars, where you belong. Life without parole. Damarion simply nodded. There was no point in fighting anymore. As he was led out of the courtroom, the cameras flashed again, capturing the final image of a man who had it all and lost everything. And for the first time in his life, Damarion Westbrook had truly faded into nothing. Damarion Westbrook had once been the face of black excellence, the man who defied odds, built an empire, and made the world believe in his version of success. He flaunted wealth like armor, each designer suit, each luxury car, each perfectly curated Instagram post reinforcing the image of a self-made mogul. People envied him. They wanted to be him. And for a while, he believed he had won. But in the end, the image crumbled. The empire wasn't built on brilliance or hard work, it was built on lies, fraud, and deception. And when the truth came out, everything he fought for turned to ash. His assets were seized. The mansion that had once symbolized his power was stripped from him, the doors locked, his name erased from the deeds. His carefully curated online persona shattered overnight. Followers who once praised him turned against him, their admiration replaced with disgust. The man who once had millions of supporters was now a cautionary tale, a warning of how greed and arrogance could lead to ruin. Prison swallowed him whole. The same man who once sipped $1,000 cognac now drank from a rusted water fountain in a 6x8 cell. The same man who once hosted lavish parties now spent his days in silence, ignored by the world he had worked so hard to impress. He had no visitors. No friends. No family left to mourn him. And then, one day, it was over. They found him unresponsive in his death row cell. No final words. No grand exit. Just another forgotten man who had reached too high and fallen too far. His body went unclaimed. No funeral, no mourning, no legacy, just a name that once held power, now nothing more than a whisper in the halls of true crime history. This is the story of a man who built his life on lies and lost everything, including the people who mattered most. It begs the question, was it ever worth it? Do you think Damarion's downfall was inevitable, or could he have saved himself before it was too late? Let us know in the comments. And if this story shocked you, like and subscribe for more cases that expose the darkest sides of ambition, greed, and betrayal.